Imagine a vault. Not a vault constructed of thick reinforced steel or heavy titanium doors, but a vault made entirely of mathematics. For decades, the modern world has operated under the absolute belief that this invisible mathematical fortress was utterly unbreakable. We call it the RSA 256-bit encryption standard. It is the silent, unseen bedrock of our entire global civilization. Every single time you swipe a credit card to buy a cup of coffee, every time a multinational corporation transfers payroll for thousands of employees, every time a sovereign nation purchases millions of barrels of crude oil, all of that wealth, all of that power, it flows through this complex, invisible labyrinth of cryptographic algorithms. The greatest minds in computer science and global security agencies have repeatedly assured us that this system is impenetrable. They proudly declared that it would take a traditional supercomputer working at maximum capacity for millions of years just to crack a single secure transaction. We felt safe. We trusted the system. We built our empires upon this digital foundation. But what if I told you that the foundation was already shattered? What if I told you that the impenetrable fortress we all blindly trust evaporated into thin air in exactly 12 seconds? Welcome to Shadow Dossier. Tonight we are opening a highly classified file that international intelligence agencies and central banks have spent the last 3 years desperately trying to burn. This is not a story about a bank robbery. This is the story of the day the digital Earth stood completely still. Not because of a hypersonic nuclear missile screaming through the atmosphere, but because of a silent ghost inside the machine. A phantom anomaly that reached into the most secure financial network on the planet and stole $1 billion without leaving a single digital fingerprint behind. To understand the magnitude of this catastrophic event, we must go back to a freezing cold night in November. The major financial capitals of the world, from Wall Street to London to Tokyo, were fast asleep. Deep underground in a heavily fortified data center in Brussels, the massive server farms of the SWIFT network hummed with their usual, quiet, rhythmic precision. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or SWIFT, is the central nervous system of global finance. It is the ultimate arbiter of truth for the world economy. It processes tens of millions of highly encrypted messages and handles trillions of dollars every single day. It is guarded by layers upon layers of the most advanced defensive algorithms ever conceived by human intelligence. It is a digital fortress, watched over by sleepless artificial intelligence sentinels and elite cybersecurity operators. But the enemy that approached in the dead of night did not care about traditional defenses. At exactly 2:14 in the morning local time, the monitors inside the Central Security Operations Center began to flicker with strange, anomalous data. There was no blaring klaxon. There was no flashing red alert on the main screen. There was no panicked phone call from a breached terminal. There was only a silent, creeping anomaly, a microscopic deviation in the massive data stream that was almost imperceptible to the human eye. The senior information security officer on duty, a veteran of cyber warfare who had spent decades hunting state-sponsored hackers, noticed a sequence of code that simply defied all logic. It was as if someone, or something, was effortlessly walking straight through the thick digital walls. The security team watched in absolute paralyzing horror as the complex encryption keys meant to protect the world's wealth simply unraveled before their eyes. They dissolved, like sugar in boiling water. It was not a brute force attack. A brute force attack is loud and clumsy, like a battering ram smashing against a wooden gate. A brute force attack triggers alarms and defensive protocols immediately. This was something else entirely. It was elegant. It was silent. It was deeply terrifying. It was quantum. You see, the complex mathematics that protect our modern world rely on one fundamental, undeniable fact. Factoring incredibly massive prime numbers is exceptionally difficult and time-consuming for any normal computer. But a quantum computer does not think linearly like the machines we have on our desks. A quantum computer exists in multiple states at the exact same time. It uses the mind-bending principles of quantum mechanics to evaluate every single possible combination simultaneously. It can literally see the final answer before the question is even fully asked. For years, paranoid intelligence agencies and forward-thinking scientists warned that the day AI, functioning stable quantum computer, was successfully weaponized. It would mean the absolute end of digital security as we know it. They spoke of this theoretical nightmare in hushed tones in classified briefings. They called it Q-Day, the day encryption dies. The public was repeatedly told a comforting lie. We were told that this apocalyptic technology was still decades away from reality. We were assured that the only machines capable of such feats were bulky, unstable prototypes, locked deep inside secure subterranean government laboratories belonging to rival superpowers. But the chilling events of that November night proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the public had been thoroughly deceived. Someone out there in the dark had secretly built a fully functional quantum prototype. And worse, they had unleashed this monster into the wild. In a staggering span of exactly 12 seconds, precisely $1 billion was systematically siphoned from the central reserves of a major international institution. The wealth simply vanished into the darkest corners of the deep web. It was instantly dispersed and fragmented into a million untraceable, microscopic transactions. The panicked security teams in Brussels desperately tried to sever the external connections. They literally ran through the freezing server aisles and physically pulled the heavy fiber optic cables directly from the mainframes. But their desperate physical actions were far too late. The money was already gone, evaporated into the ether. And as the deafening silence filled the subterranean operations center, a much more terrifying truth began to dawn on the pale faces of the officials in the room. If these unknown digital thieves could do this impossible feat once, they could easily do it again. They could systematically empty every single bank account on the planet. They could instantly erase the life savings of billions of people. They could bring the entire global economy to a violently grinding halt before the sun even came up. Absolute raw panic swept through the highest classified levels of Western governments. Highly secure encrypted lines buzzed frantically between Washington and London and Paris. The emergency mandate from the absolute top was crystal clear and completely unforgiving. Do not tell the public. Do not let the global financial markets know what just happened here tonight. If the citizens of the world suddenly realized that the heavy locks on their digital doors were actually made of fragile tissue paper, the ensuing global panic and economic chaos would be infinitely worse than the theft of the $1 billion itself. An unprecedented international media blackout was immediately imposed. The global press was systematically fed a fabricated story about a routine system maintenance glitch. But behind the heavy closed doors of intelligence agencies, a massive, desperate, and entirely secret manhunt began. The FBI, the NSA, and Interpol mobilized their most elite clandestine cyber divisions. They fully expected to find a highly organized group of rogue hackers, perhaps a notorious criminal syndicate operating out of a dark basement in Eastern Europe. But the digital footprints they chased led them directly into an absolute void. The perpetrators had left no identifiable signature. There was no arrogant ransom note. There was no political manifesto posted on anonymous image boards. They were complete phantoms, and these invisible ghosts had just successfully pulled off the single greatest and most technologically advanced heist in the entire history of human civilization. But a chilling question remained. Why stop at just $1 billion? If you possess the ultimate skeleton key to absolutely every digital vault on Earth, why not simply take it all? The answer to that chilling question lies deep within the heavily classified servers of the United States Cyber Command. When the elite digital forensics teams finally began to carefully sift through the radioactive digital fallout of the Swift breach, they discovered something that terrified them far more than the missing money. The incredibly sophisticated attack vectors did not match the chaotic, unpredictable signatures of traditional rogue ransomware gangs. They did not find the crude digital fingerprints of a decentralized cartel looking for a quick cryptocurrency payout. Instead, they found the cold, calculating, and frighteningly disciplined methodology of an advanced, persistent threat. In the shadowy, high-stakes realm of global intelligence, an advanced persistent threat, or APT, is the absolute apex predator of the cyber domain. These are not teenagers sitting in dark basements. These are highly organized, heavily funded, and legally protected military cyber divisions, directly sponsored by hostile sovereign nations. The invisible digital footprints left behind by the quantum anomaly did not lead to a single laptop in a dark room. They echoed across a massive, synchronized global network of heavily disguised proxy servers. The trace signals bounced wildly across abandoned subterranean military bunkers in Eastern Europe. They pinged off heavily fortified data centers located on disputed artificial islands in the South China Sea. They ricocheted through compromised satellite uplinks hovering silently in low Earth orbit. The intelligence analysts stared at the massive, sprawling network maps in absolute disbelief. The sheer scale of the coordinated operation required the combined computing resources and the massive financial backing of a superpower. But which one? The invisible perpetrators possessed a terrifying level of strategic patience and technological supremacy. They did not simply steal the $1 billion and blindly run into the night. They utilized the unimaginable processing power of their weaponized quantum prototype to instantly shatter the massive sum into hundreds of thousands of microscopic transactions. Within mere fractions of a second, the stolen wealth was violently blasted through an impossibly complex global labyrinth of digital money laundering. It cascaded through thousands of anonymous shell companies registered in notorious offshore tax havens. It was aggressively tumbled through dozens of decentralized cryptocurrency mixers, making it mathematically impossible for even the most advanced artificial intelligence tracking algorithms to ever follow the money trail. The Western intelligence apparatus was completely and utterly paralyzed. The realization of their absolute helplessness was a bitter pill to swallow for the most powerful nations on Earth. The highest levels of government were caught in a terrifying paradoxical nightmare. If the president of the United States stepped up to the podium and publicly admitted that the RSA 256-bit encryption standard was dead. The entire global financial system would instantly, violently collapse. Wall Street would experience an unprecedented catastrophic freefall within minutes of the opening bell. The panicked public would stampede the banks in a desperate, futile attempt to withdraw their meaningless physical cash. Riots would tear through every major metropolitan center on the planet as the invisible digital scaffolding of modern society violently disintegrated. They had absolutely no choice. They were violently forced to swallow the bitter poison. They had to maintain the fragile, comforting illusion of security at all costs. The central banks quietly, desperately printed more invisible, digital money to secretly cover the massive gaping hole in the global ledger. They aggressively silenced the terrified security engineers who witnessed the quantum breach. They buried the terrifying truth under mountains of highly classified black ink and endless non-disclosure agreements. The world continued to spin in blissful, absolute ignorance. People continued to confidently swipe their credit cards. Corporations continued to authorize massive international wire transfers. The invisible mathematical fortress remained standing in the public eye, even though its heavy steel doors had already been blown completely off their hinges. But while the terrified Western governments desperately scrambled to hide the apocalyptic truth from their citizens, the stolen $1 billion did not simply sit idle in a dark offshore bank account. The money was never the final goal. The money was merely the ammunition for a much larger and infinitely more sinister geopolitical operation. The brilliant intelligence analysts at the National Security Agency eventually noticed a strange, highly coordinated pattern emerging from the absolute chaos of the digital money laundering labyrinth. The hundreds of thousands of microscopic transactions were not randomly scattering across the globe. They were slowly, deliberately, and aggressively converging. The massive fragmented wealth was being meticulously reassembled, piece by piece, in a very specific and highly strategic location. It was flowing relentlessly toward a single dark blind spot on the geopolitical chessboard. It was not moving toward a rival superpower capital. It was not moving toward a notorious terrorist haven. The stolen $1 billion was aggressively pouring into a massive, shadowy corporate entity, quietly registered in a neutral maritime jurisdiction. And this faceless corporation was systematically and aggressively buying up absolute legal control of the most critical deep water shipping ports along the entire length of the global supply chain. The terrifying reality of the quantum heist finally snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The enemy had not attacked the financial system to destroy it. They had hacked the global bank to secretly finance a silent, hostile takeover of the physical world. The invisible enemy did not want to bomb the Western world into submission. They did not want to trigger a radioactive nuclear holocaust that would completely obliterate their own massive populations in the ensuing devastating retaliatory strikes. They wanted to slowly, quietly, and legally strangle the absolute lifeblood of the global supply chain. By aggressively utilizing the stolen $1 billion to systematically purchase absolute controlling stakes in these highly strategic maritime choke points, they were literally buying the heavy iron keys to the global economy. Imagine a terrifying geopolitical scenario where a massive shadowy corporate conglomerate suddenly legally dictates the massive flow of crude oil, moving slowly through the incredibly narrow waters of the Suez Canal. Imagine a faceless, invisible entity that aggressively controls the heavy container traffic navigating the incredibly dangerous and heavily pirated waters surrounding the Horn of Africa. The Western intelligence agencies realized with absolute paralyzing clarity that they were not fighting a disorganized group of rogue financial hackers looking for a quick payday. They were fighting a heavily militarized, highly advanced sovereign state that was playing a massive geopolitical game of chess on an entirely new, multi-dimensional board. The stolen $1 billion was nothing more than a highly effective, weaponized financial instrument. It was a silent digital ghost, actively rewriting the physical borders of the modern world without firing a single conventional bullet. But the most terrifying aspect of this entire, highly classified intelligence dossier is not the massive physical acquisition of these vital strategic global ports. The most deeply terrifying aspect is the chilling realization of how they actually acquired the initial massive funding. The incredibly successful penetration of the SWIFT financial network was not the ultimate grand finale of their massive geopolitical master plan. It was merely a highly successful and deeply terrifying proof of concept. It was a silent, devastating demonstration of absolute technological supremacy over the entire Western world. The invisible enemy had successfully loaded the quantum gun. They had quietly pointed it directly at the beating heart of the global financial system and pulled the trigger without making a single sound. The catastrophic implications of this successful weaponized quantum test run are absolutely paralyzing to fully comprehend. If this highly advanced weaponized quantum prototype can effortlessly melt through the heavily fortified RSA 256-bit encryption standard of the international banking system in exactly 12 seconds, what else can it silently destroy? The invisible digital architecture of our entire modern civilization is now completely, violently exposed to the invisible elements. The heavy encryption algorithms that silently protect your personal medical records, your private daily communications, and your absolute fundamental digital identity are now completely, utterly obsolete. The highly sophisticated defensive firewalls that actively protect the fragile national power grids from catastrophic, continent-wide blackouts are effectively standing wide open in the dark. The massive, highly secure military communication networks that directly control the highly classified launch sequences of thousands of thermonuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles are suddenly terrifyingly vulnerable to invisible phantom manipulation by an unknown foreign power. We are no longer living in the secure, comforting digital age we confidently built over the last 40 years. We have unknowingly crossed the terrifying, invisible threshold into the dark, uncertain, post-encryption world. The heavy steel locks on your digital doors are now completely made of fragile tissue paper. The sophisticated artificial intelligence alarm systems you blindly trust to protect your most sensitive personal secrets are completely deaf and entirely blind to the new invisible quantum threat. The comforting illusion of absolute digital security that keeps the modern civilized world spinning without descending into absolute violent chaos has been violently shattered by a silent, invisible mathematical ghost living inside a machine. You must ask yourself a deeply terrifying question right now as you sit quietly watching this screen. When the massive digital walls protecting our global civilization finally come violently crashing down completely around us, who will ultimately control the physical ashes that remain in the devastating aftermath? Welcome to the terrifying new digital Cold War. You are watching Shadow Dossier. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because the absolute terrifying truth is always actively hiding in the deep dark, digital shadows, and we are the only ones who will aggressively drag it into the blinding light. The next highly classified dossier is already prepared and waiting for you. The files we uncover next will make this quantum nightmare look like a simple childhood fairy tale. We are diving deeper into the absolute abyss of the global deep state. The invisible wars being fought silently right over your head are escalating at a speed that human comprehension simply cannot match. You have been warned. Do not look away. Do not trust the screen you are staring at. Everything is compromised. Everything is vulnerable. The quantum ghost is already inside your machine. Stay vigilant and stay in the shadows until we broadcast again.